When the gods were like humans, they bore the labor. The labor was heavy, the distress was much, and the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose.
Before we argue about anything, we need to talk about what we're actually looking at. Because this isn't one story from one book. It's three completely different versions of the same event from three completely different sources separated by thousands of years. And if you don't know where each one came from, you can't tell who's telling the truth and who's just telling it their way.
We don't need a tour. The text speaks for itself.
It does. But which text and who wrote it and when, that matters. So let me start with the physical stuff, the clay tablets. Here's what most people don't understand. The oldest stories we're talking about, the Sumerian stories, weren't written on paper. They weren't written on parchment. They were pressed into clay, wet clay from the riverbanks of southern Iraq, shaped into tablets about the size of your hand, pressed with a reed stylus, basically a stick cut to make wedge-shaped marks, and then baked either in a kiln or just left in the sun until they dried hard.
And then?
And then, starting in the 1840s, archaeologists started digging in the deserts of Iraq. British, French, German expeditions, they found these tablets by the thousands. Some whole, some in pieces. They shipped them back to museums, the British Museum, the Louvre, the University of Pennsylvania. And over the next 100 years, scholars figured out how to read them.
We know they're old. We don't know they're accurate.
We know they're old because they've been dated. Carbon dating on the organic material found with them. Clay seal impressions that can be matched to known kings. Layer dating. How deep in the dig they were found. Multiple methods, all pointing to the same range. The tablets we're discussing today, the ones with the flood story and the labor rebellion, they date to roughly 1700 BCE. That's about 3,700 years ago. And here's the thing that makes a skeptic go quiet. These tablets weren't all found in one place. Not even close. They were found in Nippur, in Nineveh, in Sippar cities separated by hundreds of miles, written by different scribes in different centuries, in two different languages, Sumerian and Akkadian. And they all tell the same core story, the same labor rebellion, the same flood, the same God warning a human to build a boat.
And it's not just Mesopotamia, is it?
Flood myths exist on every continent. The Sumerians had it. The Bible has it. The Greeks had Deucalion. The Hindus had Manu. The Aztecs had their own flood story, Coxcox and the Great Deluge. The Maya, the Chinese, the Polynesians, Native American tribes, cultures that had zero contact with each other, separated by oceans and thousands of years, all independently wrote down a story about the world drowning and a few people surviving on a boat.
Or they're all pointing at the same divine event, remembered differently.
That's one interpretation.
So that's source one. Clay tablets, dug up, dated, translated, displayed, found hundreds of miles apart in different languages, telling the same story, and flood myths on every continent.
That's source one. Now let me tell you about source two, because it's a completely different story of survival, the Book of Enoch. Here's where this one gets wild.
And that book was scripture. It was respected. It was quoted in the New Testament. Jude quotes it directly.
And then it wasn't, here's what happened. Around the 2nd century CE, the rabbis who were finalizing the Hebrew Bible decided to exclude it. They thought it was too dangerous, too detailed about angelic rebellion, too likely to inspire copycat mysticism. The early Christian church mostly followed suit. Enoch was cut from the canon. It became a banned book.
And source three?
Source three is the weird one. So here's where we get into something that sounds like ancient history, but is actually very modern. The word Anunnaki comes from the Sumerian tablets in the original texts. The Anunnaki were the senior gods, the ones who sat in council, decreed the fates, ran the show. They were a pantheon, divine beings. That's all they were.
That's not what the tablets say.
No, it isn't every credentialed Sumerologist who has examined Sitchin's work has said he mistranslated the texts. Michael Heiser, who has a PhD in Hebrew Bible and Semitic languages, created an entire website, sitchiniswrong.com, going through Sitchin's claims line by line and showing where the actual Sumerian says something completely different. The word Nibiru appears in the texts, but it refers to a star or planet in a crossing position, not an alien homeworld. There is no passage in any Sumerian text about genetic engineering. There is no passage about mining gold. Sitchin invented those connections.
But his books sold millions.
Translated into 25 languages. And here's why it's a great story. Ancient aliens engineered humanity. A hidden planet comes back every few thousand years. It's exciting. It's cinematic. It explains everything in one neat package. And it makes people feel like they've discovered a secret the experts are hiding.
And the experts say he's wrong.
The experts say he's not reading the language correctly. That's not a matter of opinion. Sumerian is a deciphered language. You can look up the grammar. You can check the dictionary. The tablets say what they say. And scholars who've spent their careers reading them say Sitchin's translations don't match. So here's where we are. 3 sources, 3 views. Voice 1. I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm here to defend the Enochites reading, the version where the rebellion was sin. The watchers fell. They abandoned their station. 200 of them descended on a mountain, Mount Hermon, in what's now the Golan Heights, swore an oath to take human wives and beget children. Their leader was named Samiaza. He was afraid. He told the others, "I fear you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty." But they all swore together. 20 chiefs, each commanding 10. That's 200 structured. This wasn't a vague mythological event. This was a planned operation.
And your position on what happened?
My position is simple. They corrupted humanity. They taught things humans weren't ready for: weapons, cosmetics, astrology, writing. Their children were giants who devoured the earth. The flood was the response. It was necessary. It was justice.
Necessary. Justice. Those are loaded words for someone who claims to be neutral.
I don't claim to be neutral. I claim to be right.
Voice 2. Your turn.
I'm here to defend the Sumerian reading. The older reading. The one that was pressed into clay 1400 years before anyone wrote the Book of Enoch.
And your position.
My position is that the Sumerian version is closer to what actually happened because it's older and it's less moralized. It describes a practical conflict. Workers versus management, not a cosmic fall. The moral framework, the angels and demons stuff, that was added centuries later by people who needed the rebels to be evil to justify what came next.
That's a grotesque simplification.
It's what the text says.
Actually, it is what the text says. The Atrahasis tablet, the complaint is explicitly about noise, but we'll get to that. Now you've met both of them. Voice 1 believes the rebellion was sin. Voice 2 believes it was a labor dispute. I'm here to keep them honest. Let the debate begin.
The Sumerian version is a corrupted memory. It strips the moral dimension from the event. There's no right and wrong, no judgment, no accountability. It reads like a labor grievance filed with a divine HR department.
And maybe that's because it's closer to what actually happened. Maybe the moral dimension came later. Maybe someone with an interest in framing the rebels as evil, added it centuries after the fact.
That someone would be the Jewish authors of 1 Enoch, writing during the Second Temple period, roughly 300 BCE. And there's scholarly support for this. A researcher named Amar Anis at the University of Tartu in Estonia published a paper in 2010 arguing that the Watchers in Enoch are reworkings of the Mesopotamian Apkallu, 7 antediluvian sages. Think of the Apkallu as the Sumerian version of culture heroes. They brought civilization, metallurgy, writing, astronomy, medicine. They were associated with Enki, the god of wisdom.
The arts being the same doesn't mean the beings are the same.
But it raises the question. If the Sumerians said the gods gave us civilization and it was good, and the Enochic authors said those same beings were fallen angels and it was evil, who's right? And why did the Enochic authors flip it?
They flipped it because they understood what the Sumerians didn't. The knowledge was a trap. You can't hand a child a loaded gun and call it a gift. The Watchers gave humanity fire, metal weapons, cosmetics, and humanity used them to destroy itself. The Sumerians looked at the same event and said, "How wonderful we have civilization." The Enochic authors looked at it and said, "Look at the body count." One of those responses is naive. The other is honest.
Or one of those responses is from the people who received the knowledge, and the other is from the people who decreed the flood to destroy the people who received it. Of course, the flood makers' tradition calls the knowledge givers evil. They needed them to be evil to justify what they did next.
What they did next was clean the earth of a corruption that was consuming it.
What they did next was drown everyone. Every man, woman, child, animal, because they were too noisy. That's the Sumerian reason. Not violence. Not corruption. The humans were too loud. The god in charge couldn't sleep. So he killed them all.
That's the Atrahasis version. Yes. But it's worth noting, the Atrahasis includes 3 prior attempts at population control before the flood. Each time, the humans survived because someone intervened. The flood was the 4th attempt after 3 failures. It wasn't a snap decision. Source 2, the Book of Enoch, they call him the strict one. He's going to take the position that the old order was right, that the hierarchy existed for a reason, that the beings who rebelled were wrong, that the knowledge they gave humanity was a corruption, not a gift, and that the flood, the great disaster that wiped out almost everything, was justified.
I don't hedge because the text doesn't hedge. 200 beings descended on a mountain, took human wives, taught forbidden knowledge, and destroyed the earth. That's not my interpretation. That's what it says.
And we'll get there. But first, meet the other one.
Because history is written by the survivors. And the ones who decreed the flood survived. The ones who gave us knowledge got chained in darkness. Funny how that works.
It's not funny, it's justice.
See? He can't help himself. Already judging.
Now, the sources, the characters, and the positions. Let me walk you through the actual story. The version all 3 sources agree on before they start disagreeing.
They abandoned their station. The text is explicit. 200 of them descended on a mountain, swore an oath, took wives, and corrupted humanity. It's the oldest case of insubordination in the record, because that's what it was.
Or, and hear me out, it was a labor dispute. The oldest labor dispute in history. Here's the Sumerian version. The one carved in clay 1,000 years before the Book of Enoch was written.
And you're taking that at face value because the older account has no moral framework. It reads like a labor grievance filed with the divine HR department. There's no right and wrong, no accountability. It's purely transactional.
And maybe that's because it's closer to what actually happened. Maybe the moral framework came later. Maybe someone with an interest in framing the rebels as evil added the moral dimension centuries after the fact.
Actually, we do know which version came first. The Sumerian texts are older. The Atrahasis, that's the clay tablet story where the Igigi rebellion appears, dates to around 1700 BCE. The Book of Enoch dates to around 300 BCE at the earliest. That's a 1400-year gap. The Sumerian version came first.
That's one scholar.
Greenfield Ben Dov Kavanvig. It's not one scholar It's a position in the field. The knowledge the Watchers teach in Enoch, metallurgy, astrology, writing, cosmetics, is identical to the knowledge the Apkallu bring in the Sumerian tradition, same beings, reverse judgment.
They flipped it because they understood what the Sumerians didn't, that the knowledge was a trap. You can't hand a child a loaded gun and call it a gift. The Watchers gave humanity fire, metal, weapons, cosmetics, and humanity used them to destroy itself. What they did next was clean the earth of a corruption that was consuming it.
What they did next was drown everyone, every man, woman, child, animal, because they were too noisy. That's a rhetorical move, not an argument. The Sumerians didn't say noise was a metaphor. They said noise. A god couldn't nap. That's not a moral crisis. That's a noise complaint. And the response to a noise complaint was genocide.
To be fair, the atrahasis includes 3 attempts at population control before the flood. Each time, humans survived because someone intervened. The flood was the 4th attempt after 3 failures. It wasn't a snap decision.
And yet, he saved them. While your guy, the one who decreed the flood, was drowning everyone because he couldn't sleep. I know which one I'd call the good guy.
You would. That's exactly the problem.
I believe the tablets are real and the translations are contested. That's all I can prove. Everything else is interpretation.
Don't be dramatic.
I'm not being dramatic. I'm asking a question.
Next time, the knowledge itself, metallurgy, astrology, writing, weapons, gift or curse, we'll look at what each tradition says the rebels actually taught and what happened when humans used it.
The answer to that question depends entirely on who's holding the sword.